began. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown.
I mean, listen, one main thing that I don't do is I don't go into the blatant overt things because that's not how the powers that be move anymore. It's not blatant and overt to a degree. Some people will say, okay, this is blatant, this is obvious. But the people who wear the robes, who are judges, the people who wear the medical doctor robes, the people who handle the policies, they are the ideology. A lot of them happen to be black-faced white supremacists now. Okay, so this basically what we're looking for is the wrong target. That's my point. We have to look deeper into this. This is why they don't like extreme intellectuals, brother, because we go to the root of a thing. That's what the word radical really means in essence, is to go to the root of something. You are radical, you're crazy. Why? Because I'm not going to compromise my beliefs, number one. Two, I'm not going to just accept what you give me. Number three, I'm going to question everything about you and what you say. And the main thing I'm going to question is your motive. So the thing we have to look at is who is running it for real. And when you look at that all the way beyond the labels, beyond the religions, beyond the gender ideological pseudo-scientific nonsense, and of course, beyond the, I would say, political parties, you see who really runs it. And that's why they don't want people to talk, because you're going to make people think above all the nonsense. All those things divide people. When you say international bankers, when you start going to who pays who, where is the money coming from? Follow the money. Then you'll find out who owns everything. And at that point, then things will change. Correct.
And coincidentally enough, whenever anybody speaks about those people,
come on, bro,
they usually follow with a deactivation of all accounts. Why is that? Speak on that. Who is the international banking family of Europe, and why do everybody get taken out whenever they speak on them?
Oh man, everyone should read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Everyone should know about the meeting that took place off the coast of Jekyll Island in the early 1900s. Everyone should know about the Federal Reserve Act. Everyone should know about Woodrow Wilson. Everyone should know about J.P. Morgan. Everyone should know about the Carnegies, the Rothschilds, the Warburgs. Everyone should know about the Waltons. Everyone should know about the Vanderbilts. Everyone should know about these are the names of, of course, the Rockefellers. Again, very critical about the Rockefellers, John D. Rockefeller and all the rest of them. You must know about these. Why? Because they shaped the modern world that we currently live in. From the financial area to the educational system to the agricultural system to the very banking itself, they shaped it. So while a lot of us are arguing, we're not realizing the people who quite literally put this thing together are the ones who have perpetuated exactly where we are to this very moment. We argue over nonsense on a surface level, but if we both came together and said, hold on, let's sit down and really delve deep into where this thing came from, then we can say, oh, these people want to get rid of over 4 billion human beings on the planet, including white folk. That's not conspiracy theory. That is conspiracy fact. National Security Study Memorandum 200 under Dr. Henry Kissinger, 32nd Secretary of State under President Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, authorized in 1974. After that, you had Global 2000, authorized under President Jimmy Carter. You have Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the advisor to Jimmy Carter, who said, quote, in earlier times, it was easier to kill 1 million people, or pardon me, it was easier to control 1 million people than to physically kill 1 million people. He said, but today it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than it is to control, end quote. That's the mind of the advisor to the president. What does that mean? Once you look at all of this, you realize the game is bigger. It's much bigger than just black and white now. Now we're dealing with, as you know, the Bible says, or science says, principalities, rulers, spiritual wickedness in high places. They are not interested in having human beings on the planet who do not comply with them. Black, white, and all in between. They're not interested anymore. And the problem is social media backfired on them because it was supposed to trap us more and for us to give up more of our information so that they can trap us. But we started to put some stuff up in there and started waking people up. And now we're educating, and now they're like, God damn it, we didn't expect it to happen like that. Or should I say so soon? Which I wrote about in book number 2, which is another reason why you brothers with these RICO charges, you should have read the book when it came out. But it's a real thing.
They tell you this to your face. Black Hispanics between 14 to 21. They must get stopped.
At the end of the month, these officers, whoever don't have that arrest or those few summonses, they're pressured to find something. You might not see nothing. You're supposed to be visible. You might not see anything, but you go hunting, like bounty hunting for an arrest. Locking up some old guy, some homeless guy, finding somebody who's riding a bicycle on the sidewalk, who's spitting, and you bring him in.
The problem is when you go hunting, when you put any type of numbers on a police officer to perform, we are going to go to the most vulnerable.
The most vulnerable.
Of course, we're going to go to LGBT community. We're going to go to the black community. We're going to go to those people that have no vote, that have no power. If we start doing what we're doing in Midtown Manhattan, a phone call to the mayor's office is going to be made. That's going to be the end of it.
We're the predators, they're the prey. The worst thing you can have is a police officer that needs an arrest for the month.
So you're all minorities. How does that make you feel?
It's horrible.
This is something coming from the top that trickles its way down, and this is why we're all here today.